with you here on British Muslim TV, Sky Channel 752. We're also online, www.britishmuslim.tv, with me, Ahmad Bostan, with you for the next hour. Now, unfortunately, today is not going to be an upbeat show as we normally have on this Friday evening, because we have met and seen the terrible news, absolutely devastating news of the murder of Sir David Amess, a Conservative Member of Parliament, a long-standing member of the UK Parliament, who was stabbed multiple times just before midday today. Our thoughts and our prayers are with his family, his loved ones. The entire nation mourns with them today. And for me, it really brought back painful memories of when the late Joe Cox was so viciously murdered by a far-right extremist. Of course, we don't know the motive behind this murder as of yet. But I remember that time when Joe Cox was so viciously murdered. I remember it was in the middle of Ramadan. And I was here at our British Muslim TV studios in Wakefield, not so far from Batley and Spen, the constituency of the late Joe Cox. And it really, I think, opens a wider conversation around a kinder, gentler politics, a kinder, gentler society, and whether politicians and those who are active in public life, and you may not consider yourself a politician or anything of that nature, but maybe you're active in the community, maybe you're active on social affairs, on issues, people who speak out, people who are in the public realm, should they be afforded more protection? Where does that protection start and where does it finish? Do we face the danger if we start talking about security and protection, we can become a society that's full of security, full of barriers, perhaps even removing that aspect of accessible politicians and politics? How do we get the right balance? Well, joining me today, I'm delighted to say I have an inspirational guest, someone who is a general practitioner, she's a politician, she's an influential Muslim woman, someone who is not afraid to speak her mind and has, unfortunately, as a result, suffered abuse herself because of the fact that she refuses to stay silent. She refuses to move away from the public when issues are tough or difficult. It's a great honor to be joined by Councillor Dr. Shabina Asad Qayyum on the show tonight. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shabina. Thank you so much for joining us. Maybe I can start off by asking you about this terrible news that we're seeing today, the horrific murder of the Conservative Member of Parliament, Sir David Amess. Absolutely shocking.
It is. Walaikum assalam, Brother Ahmed, and thank you very much for having me on. It's a very solemn moment for all of us in positions of elected representation today. Whether you're an activist, whether you're an MP, whether you're a councillor, today and the events that have led up to it undermine the very element and integrity of our democracy in this country. And Sir David Amess was only doing his job. He'd been an MP for 40 years. He had served his community with a great element of pride. He was a lover of animals and a gentle, compassionate soul. And just as everybody in the nation has been horrified by today's events, today we put our political ideologies aside, and today we stand as one, because we have a duty and a responsibility as well in those elected positions to foster a kinder and more compassionate type of politics. And we have to condemn this type of crime at every level. And I have been experiencing the same. I've experienced a lot of hate and abuse, as we will find out later on during the show. But for now, a tribute to Sir David Amess and our thoughts with his family at this very, very tragic time.
Absolutely. Now, we remember, and it brings back painful memories, as I said in my introduction, of the horrific murder of the late Joe Cox. And at that time, there was a national conversation around what do we do differently? Do we have more security in place for our politicians? When does that security become too much, to the extent that the accessibility of politicians becomes a problem? Do you think we have, as a society, have we really actioned that conversation? It happened, we spoke about it, but have we done anything to provide more protection, more security, more safety to those who are active in public life?
I think that we've got far to go before we can achieve such measures as total protection. Let's be honest, Brother Ahmed. When we look at events whereby people in public office for public representation are attacked, there is always a reflection in the aftermath as to how we could improve things, what could have been done better, what could have been implemented, how we're going to change moving forward. But just to make you aware that politicians and people in public representation don't actually fall under the Public Protection Order Act, which means that we are vulnerable and we continue to be vulnerable. And with the advent of platforms such as social media, you have Twitter, you have Facebook, you just have to go to any MP's Twitter feed to see the amount of abuse that MPs or indeed councillors or those that are popular politicians face on a daily basis, simply because of the fact that an individual doesn't like them, an individual's thoughts don't align with them, and some of the language that is used is quite frankly abhorrent and unacceptable. And that is where conversations have been had in the past that social media platforms do have a great deal of accountability and responsibility to address such behaviour. Because what that does is, in turn, it fuels hatred. And that hatred then manifests into, down the road, the events that we have seen today. So this really does call for either a change in the law whereby politicians and those in public office are covered by the Public Protection Order Act, or social media platforms need to take more responsibility and ownership of who they allow to use their platforms in such a manner. And in the past, provision of ID when registering for such websites has known to be a suggestion that could be quite successful, but we have to start something. This is the second occurrence in 5 years.
And what we are not talking about is censorship, and what we're not talking about is having a difference of opinion. And of course, when you stand for public office, and both you and I, Dr. Shabina, have the honor of being public office holders, you do so knowing that you need to have a thick skin when it comes to differences of opinion. Tempers can be frayed, there can be disagreements. But what we're talking about here is abuse. What we're talking about here is hate, and even hate crime. Of course, we don't know the motives behind the horrific murder of the respected Member of Parliament, Sir David Amess. But what we do know is that in politics as a whole, there has been, as you said, this pulverization and really this view among some that politicians are fair game for being targeted with devastating consequences. We saw with the horrific murder of Joe Cox. But how would that work in practice, Dr. Shabina? Because today the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has come out and, like everyone across the political spectrum, in and outside of politics, condemned this horrific murder. But he has said, look, politicians need security. What does that security look like? What does that provision look like? How do you get the right balance between politicians, like any other person, having the right to feel safe and secure, but also ensuring that they are still accessible to their constituents and those who wish to speak with them?
Well, I think that there needs to be, and these are just suggestions, obviously, that added security obviously means added workforce, doesn't it? We've seen the cuts to the police. Is it viable? Thinking of adapting the police force to provide security to our politicians? Is it viable thinking of employing agency to give security to politicians? These are all options that need to be considered. But in the meantime, accessibility is a real reason why many politicians do or carry out surgeries in their constituencies. And we've seen with the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic that a lot of in-person contact had changed to virtual surgeries. So there could be the option, and this is a suggestion as to whether there could be a modification of that contact and accessibility with MPs. Again, comes the question as to whether who would be vetting the audience. Does there need to be a vetting of those people that come through the door? Do security checks need to take place? Who are going to undertake those security checks? So these are all questions that need to be asked and explored as well.
Absolutely. There's plenty there, as you said, that needs to be explored. We are here tonight on Behind the Headlines on British Muslim TV. Please do call in. We're live this evening. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your reaction to the horrific murder of the Honourable Member of Parliament, Sir David Amess, who was horrifically murdered today. We'd love to hear your reaction in terms of how you're feeling. What do you think this now means for us as a society moving forward? Of course, as Dr. Shabina has rightly said, this is the second murder of a UK Member of Parliament in 5 years. We don't know the motive, of course, behind this particular murder. We do know the motive behind the murder of the late Joe Cox. It was far-right extremism, far-right terrorism. Where do we go from here? Please let us know your thoughts. 01924 231 083 is the number to call. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to continue speaking about Councillor Dr. Shabina Asad Qayyum's life, her experiences as a prominent Muslim woman, active both in the field of medicine and politics, and we would love for you to join the conversation as well. 01924 231 083. We're at British Muslim TV on Twitter. We're also British Muslim TV on Facebook. We'll be back right after this break. Keep it British Muslim TV. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Behind the Headlines here on British Muslim TV. We started the programme today on a very sad note, but a necessary one in light of the horrific murder of Sir David Amess, a long-standing Member of Parliament of over 40 years, someone who served his constituents with absolute dedication, horrifically murdered, stabbed multiple times just before midday today. We do not yet know the motives behind this horrific murder, and he becomes the second UK Member of Parliament to be murdered in such a horrific way in 5 years. And I'm in conversation with prominent British Muslim politician and general practitioner, Councillor Dr. Shabina Asad Qayyum, and we're talking about where we go from here as a society, as a country. Where do we get the right balance between ensuring everyone feels safe and secure, including our politicians, but also ensuring that our politics remains accessible? And Dr. Shabina there reflecting on how the COVID pandemic has actually presented an opportunity for us to do things differently. We've seen more things going online. Perhaps there's a future to have more online surgeries, advice surgeries that members of parliament, councillors and elected officials have. Now, Dr. Shabina, you look at this horrific atrocity today with your personal experience as well, because you were elected as a councillor in Peterborough, and sadly you have suffered abuse, you have suffered hate. Please tell me about that experience and how you dealt with it.
Well, I was very much encouraged by my Labour Party colleagues to stand for elected office. I am a GP. I was also a radio presenter for a local community radio station for a health show. And that's how my public popularity actually grew. And even now I'm known as Dr. Shabina. And I decided to come forward simply because of the fact that I felt that I had something to offer in the way of not just my role as a GP, but in an extension to that role, whereby I could help people with their housing issues, their educational issues, their mental health issues, the wider socioeconomic factors that affect individuals in that position. And being a counsellor and standing for that role seemed to fit the bill. However, what it didn't prepare me for was the abuse that followed. Now, being in public office, you said before the break that politicians are often told that they need to develop thick skin. And you're absolutely right. It is a very multitasking role. It is something that you are subject to an awful lot of public scrutiny for, and you will be meted out with a lot of criticism. However, criticism is good because you have the opportunity to reflect on how you're working and perhaps change some of those decisions that you make that affect your constituents.
Yes.
However, I had been, from the time that I stood for office, I was abused by members of the opposition, and I was also sent hate emails that were of a racist nature, where they were blatantly racist. And I had to take the decision. I had letters put through my letterbox. I had to install a camera system around the house. And the decision was actually made to then report this to the police as a hate crime. And I cannot tell you how relieved I was, because normally we're told to ignore such abuse, and women more so. And there are reports, parliamentary reports, that stipulate that women are more subjected to abuse than men are. And I tried very much so to table a motion in our local authority to help with supporting women who were suffering from abuse in public political office. And it was amended. It wasn't passed to a satisfactory degree. But then again, we see the events of today and we say, well, actually, all politicians need to be protected. But statistics do say that women are more subjected to abuse, and BAME females more so than males. So I reported this email to the police, and I was glad and very happy to say about 2 months ago, the individual was found through location of their IP address, and they were presented to court and they were charged. So there is a good that comes out of this. And what I'd like to say to your viewers is that people in elected office often do a lot of work in their own time, in their family time, and in their free time over the weekends. We don't really have any office hours or working schedules that we adhere to. We are available pretty much all the time for our constituents. So abuse of any kind is unacceptable. But like I've mentioned to you before, that we don't need to develop a thick skin for abuse. We do need to develop a thick skin to undertake the responsibility of the role. And that's what I agree with. But I refuse to accept that I should develop thick skin to accept the abuse that is meted out to me or my colleagues, whether they are male or female, in elected office. We shouldn't have to do that. And that's the point that I want to put across. So it's very important that going forward, people have a little bit more respect for their elected representatives and come across as a little bit more kinder and compassionate, given the hours that we put in.
Sure. And I think it's a very important point that you make there around reporting abuse, because so many people suffer in silence, whether it's public officials, whether it's people who are sadly suffering abuse in their personal lives, suffer in silence. But there is, as you said, there's support available, there's help available. You went to your local police and the individual in question was charged. But I want to ask you, in your experience, Dr. Shabina, where does this abuse come from? Where does this hateful abuse, particularly the racism to which you refer, where does it come from? Is it the fact that you are not accepted by certain people as a proudly British Muslim woman active in public life?
I want to say that with a degree of confidence that the elephant in the room is the fact that from a very young age, I was made to feel that I was different to my non-Muslim and white peers. And I've had to work awfully hard to get where I am in life, from trying to achieve a medicine degree to standing in public office. So I'm used to the rough and tumble of being a Muslim female within the United Kingdom. However, I refuse to accept the diktat of anybody that says that I, as a British female Muslim, have a place where they dictate I belong. I know where I belong. I belong in the United Kingdom, serving the British people and serving my electorate, and that is where I will stay. But the goodness that I take from it is that there's only a small percentage of people that have this hate. And a lot of this hate, in answer to your question, does stem from the advent of social media. Our social media platforms are responsible for providing this medium to propagate, for people to propagate their hatred. And that is something that needs to be looked at. However, the larger proportion of people are good people, and it is those people that we are here for, and it is those people that are worth it. So that's what keeps me going, that the larger percentage of people are good people.
Absolutely. And social media is very much something that has done a lot of good. It's changed a lot for the better. You're seeing so many people now more connected than ever before. But as you said, the lack of regulation that social media companies are often accused of having has caused issues in terms of accountability, scrutiny, and making sure that hate is not allowed to live on social media. That type of hate that cannot be tolerated on the streets of Britain shouldn't be tolerated on the social media platforms of Britain. But are social media companies, in your view, Dr. Shabina, are they doing enough? You know, they have all these report systems now, for example, even around misinformation, particularly if somebody puts something up around COVID-19, they'll encourage people to read the article. They may flag particular posts that are sensitive or are offensive, and they encourage their communities on social media to do it. Is that enough? Does that go far enough for you?
I don't think it goes far enough when it comes to hatred and racism, to be honest with you. There's a lot of hate that comes out of these social media platforms. And you just have to go through Twitter and Facebook to see that there are a lot of right-wing fascist groups that have established their platforms on social media, such as Facebook, and on Twitter as well. And there are lots of media portals who are very extreme right-wing that portray their narratives about certain politicians and people in public life that will often portray falsehoods and false information and false news articles about them too. And that is where the social media platforms have failed to hold such portals to account. And I think that the time has come now to launch an investigation into what these social media platforms have the power to do and make it incumbent upon them to regulate more those that use their platforms to propagate information that should indeed be true and should indeed be scrutinized, because they make an awful lot of revenue out of the followings that they have. And actually, now the time has come to put that to good use and to scrutinize it and regulate it properly, because just not enough is being done.
But how do you regulate something that operates in an international climate? There's, you can have social media platforms around the world. Is there going to be a global consensus of people who come together and say enough is enough?
Well, I think, to be honest, there have suggestions that have come forth before, and those suggestions are provision of ID to ensure that you can have an account with such social media platforms. However, people are very wary and very protective about sharing their personal ID on the internet, especially where you don't know where your information could be shared. So it has to be a secure method. It has to be one in which the account holder is reassured that their personal information will not be shared to third parties. But yes, certainly at the offset, some type of ID registration is certainly needed in order to make sure that the people that are registering to these websites and to these social media platforms are authentic and they can be identified and traced in the event of a racist hate crime taking place.
We are in conversation with Dr. Shabina Asad Qayyum. She's a local counsellor. She's also a general practitioner. And she's talking to us about her views and her experience around hate crime and how she was able to go report it to the police, and the individual in question has now been charged. The clear message saying, go and report it. We'll be back right after this break. Keep it behind the headlines. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Behind the Headlines here on British Muslim TV. And tonight we started off the show in speaking about the horrific murder of Sir David Amess, the Member of Parliament, someone who's been an MP for over 40 years. And sadly, this becomes the second Member of Parliament to be murdered in such a horrific way in the past 5 years. We spoke about where do we go from here as a country, and my guest, Councillor Dr. Shabina Asad Qayyum, has been speaking to her own experiences. And although we don't know the motive behind the murder of Sir David Amess, we do know that the late Joe Cox was murdered by a far-right extremist. The roots were very much in hate crime in that particular sense and far-right terrorism. Dr. Shabina has spoken to her own experience of dealing with hate crime and actually dealing with it successfully by reporting it to the police and by ensuring that the perpetrator was charged. And we need to ensure that we can have those conversations and openly talk about where we go from here. Now, we have a couple of minutes before the adhan. I just want to go back to my guest, Dr. Shabina. What would you say, Dr. Shabina, to British Muslim women out there who hear about the way in which politics is so confrontational and may think, do you know what, is politics really for me? Can I really get involved in there? Is there a space that I can go into? Will I be accepted in that field?
Well, I think that it's incumbent and the responsibility lies with women like myself in political office to encourage young women to come forward. There is certainly a stigma around coming into politics. People are automatically worried about their dignity or their character being assassinated. And it often is the case, and I've faced so much throughout my own standing in public office. But again, it depends. We have a responsibility whilst we are in public office to encourage those to come forward and to make a team of ethnic minority women and say, well, actually, we are worth something and we are going to change the narrative here and we're going to change the culture. So unless we take ownership of that responsibility ourselves, very little is going to change. And that is why I am here. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep on fighting and making sure that this is an attractive career prospect for a young ethnic minority BAME female that is watching this right now and thinks that politics could be a good option for her.
And actually speaking with you today reminds me of a conversation we had with the Senator Sama Atulijan in Canada, and she spoke about how so much has changed. In fact, so much improvement in terms of diversity has been made in politics, from a place where she would go to particular places and she was told because she's a woman, she can't address a particular audience. And now, you know, there is not that sense of prejudice or discrimination there. The equality of opportunities are opening up while there are still significant issues, as you have yourself, Dr. Shabina, so accurately and eloquently. Councillor Dr. Shabina Asad Qayyum, a medical practitioner, an elected official. Two titles that you perhaps don't see in the same sentence every day. And I want to ask you about that, Dr. Shabina. MashaAllah, you are a general practitioner. Alhamdulillah, you have had huge success in your GP career. What made you make that transition? Was it a seamless transition for you? Was it an easy transition? Because a lot of people would say, Dr. Shabina, mashallah, you've got a good job as a doctor. It's a rewarding career that you're in. You're in a medical career. Why would you want to come into the rough and tumble of politics and all the issues that it brings?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I actually started off as an ear, nose, throat surgeon. I worked in the main hospitals in London, St Mary's Hospital, and then I transitioned to accident and emergency, which is where I think I get a lot of my gusto from, because you've got to make spontaneous decisions about people's lives. So I worked in the main units. I've worked at Leicester Royal Infirmary. I've worked at St Mary's Hospital in London, the West Middlesex Hospital in London, in very, very busy units before I became a general practitioner. And with being a general practitioner, I realized that I was being faced with patients who had more and more and more socioeconomic problems that were affecting them. So, for example, I would see patients who were going to be made homeless and it was impacting on their mental health. So I could help with the mental health, but the actual question was, how can I help this individual who's about to lose his home, who has young children who are dependents? And if I was in a counsellor role, I could have lobbied on his behalf and spoken and communicated to the right departments at the council and the local authority to try and give him assistance. And the other things that I've seen are that being a GP actually has helped me a lot in my counsellor role. So my counsellor role is actually seen, and the reason why I made that transition is that I almost sometimes felt quite stuck when I was seeing patients. And that was difficult for me to negotiate many a times, where I would think, well, I can write a letter on surgery-headed paper, but is that really going to solve the situation? In many instances, it just wasn't enough. But since becoming a counsellor, it ties in beautifully with being a GP and being a local counsellor. And indeed, I have advised many patients to seek help and guidance from their local counsellors, because not to forget, there are people that do present to you that aren't aware of what their counsellor can actually do. So it's become incredibly useful. And it wasn't a decision that I took lightly. I had to have a look at how I was going to do justice to the roles. I'm a mother, as you know, Brother Ahmad. I'm married to an ear, nose, throat consultant who works a very busy schedule at the local hospital. And we know that our NHS has been as busier as ever. So I then decided to go part-time as a GP. So I work now 3 days as a GP, which gives me enough time to do justice to my counsellor role, because I've always felt, and I've been brought up with the ethos, that whatever I do it with principle, and I do it with a level of morality. And for me, being able to give time to that role as a counsellor is very, very important for my constituents to know me, to keep it, that I keep in touch with them, to know that I'm accessible. That's very important. I wouldn't be able to do so if I was a full-time GP, as you know. So I've had to divide my time between being a GP and a counsellor. And I'm managing it okay. I do need my breaks, though, I must admit. And sometimes I do get very tired, and I have sometimes suffered from burnout, but I'm glad that I'm able to recognise where my limitations are, and I'm able to carry on or delegate work as it is.
No, that's very interesting you make that point, because I often speak to, mashallah, we have so many successful, influential British Muslim women who have done incredible things in their respective professions. And I say to them, have you ever considered standing for elected office? They say, no. I'll rather be in the job that I'm in. I'm making that difference. But as you said, when we look at the wider societal and community issues that we're facing, when you had your patients coming in and seeing you as a doctor, it wasn't paracetamol or anything like that they needed. It wasn't medicine in the typical sense of the word. It was other needs which you as a doctor were not able to address, but you as a counsellor can. Really interesting. We're going to go to a break. Inshallah, we'll be back right after this. Keep it behind the headlines. Please keep it British Muslim Television. Dear viewers, assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the final part, would you believe it already, of Behind the Headlines here on British Muslim TV. We're honoured tonight to be joined by Counsellor Dr. Shabina Asad Qayyum, an influential general practitioner, politician, community activist, someone who's not afraid to speak her mind, as you've heard on the programme tonight, very much appealing to British Muslim women out there to put yourselves forward for elected office, to enter the realm of public office and to stand for those positions where a real difference can be made. But Dr. Shabina, I just want to ask you, all of this, when you talk about your role as a counsellor, your role as a general practitioner, people might say you're dealing with a lot of politics. It's just all politics. And what is it actually real work? You know, if you stand for office and you get elected, are you able to actually make a difference to the lives of the people that you aspired to help when you stood for office or thought about standing for office? What's been your biggest achievement thus far, would you say, as a counsellor, as a politician?
Oh, goodness gracious me. You are able to make such a difference if you put your heart and soul to the role. And that is all that is really needed. You need to be able to understand how to read reports and interpret them. A level of intellectual English is required. And I can say that without a shadow of a doubt, my biggest achievement has been my work during the COVID-19 period. I was only elected in 2019, Brother Ahmed, and in December 2020, COVID manifested on the global arena. And it came to our shores in February 2020. It hardly had 6 months, but I've had the opportunity to pass and support motions on behalf of our fabulous Labour group here in Peterborough. I have been linking with those vulnerable shielding patients who had nobody else to talk to. We've supported food banks. We've provided packed lunches and lunches for children at Christmas time. We have given books in a charitable way at Christmas time to schools for their children as well. We've done hundreds of charitable activities. We've supported local food banks as well. And just aside from that, because of my medical expertise, I've been able to propose motions on vaccinations and how to make it more accessible for the less able-bodied and those that are visually impaired. I've also attempted to table motions on the attack of people in politics, particularly women. And I've also had the opportunity to scrutinise reports and proposed a recommendation on mass testing as a pilot project here within Peterborough that I wanted to be looked into, because there are reports and there are studies to suggest that mass testing is the only way that we can get on top of decreasing numbers of infection rates of COVID-19. So those are the type of changes that I've been able to make. And
Massive
I've been
amount, yes.
Yeah, communicate between CCG and patients as well.
Yes, we do have a caller online, so I'm just going to pause you there and go to the lines and speak to this caller. Assalamu alaikum. What's your name? Where are you calling from, please? You're live on British Muslim TV.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm calling from Scotland. I just wanted to say that what happened today shows that we still have knife crime. Knife crime and violence has not stopped. We hear people getting stabbed all the time. And when you think about violence like Netflix, the Tokyo game show, that doesn't help neither, because that supports violence. The person that done it, he was 25, so surely these people are playing violent games. So
well, we don't
like more to be done with knife crime and violence.
Absolutely. A very good point, Sister Yasmin from Glasgow. Thank you for making it. And I think you're right. It does bring into question where we go from here. Of course, we do not know the motive behind the attack and the horrific murder of Sir David Amess as of yet. But of course, it is a national conversation that needs to be had in respect of knife crime, violence, as you say. Thank you very much for your call, Sister Yasmin from Glasgow. And actually, what you were saying there, Dr. Shabina, about the difference you've been able to make as a counsellor, particularly during the COVID pandemic, and actually you've seen your roles, your two roles meet each other, I suppose, in that sense, because you've had the medical obligations in terms of supporting your patients and also the wider community obligations around a lot of these street groups and WhatsApp groups that were set up during the pandemic to support the poorest and most vulnerable in society. And for you, Dr. Shabina, do you think that we as a society, Yasmin from Glasgow there reflects on the terrible news we're getting today. Have we as a society changed after COVID? Have we changed for the better? Are we going to remember some of the lessons of just being more community orientated, I suppose, as a society?
People have suffered a lot with regards to their mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic for 18 months, Brother Ahmed. Not to forget that many people have been left isolated. Children in particular, as Sister Yasmin was alluding to, have been exposed to an enormous amount of online activity with regards to gaming. And gaming is, again, it has been classified as an addiction, actually, in the medical spectrum. And people have been referred for gaming addiction. Now, we are yet to understand the effect that gaming has on an individual's intellectual ability to perpetrate crime. However, some of the games that you see nowadays are full of violence and are full of knife crime and gun crime as well. And how this manifests into an individual's subconscious that then causes the events that we see today is something that most certainly does need to be explored. And this is one of the reasons why mental health has been such a big issue after COVID, and that services and the accessibility to those services is of prime importance if we want to help this generation of people that have just come out after lockdown and have suffered with their mental health. That certainly does need to be looked at.
And where do you, Dr. Shabina, go from here? Mashallah, you've served so many years in the NHS. You mentioned the multitude of roles you've done, from accident emergency to working as an ear, nose, throat surgeon. You now are a general practitioner. You've now become a counsellor as well. Mashallah, I know you're a part of a number of leadership programs as well. What's the aspiration for you? Where do you take this journey from here?
My aspiration is to serve, Brother Ahmed. For as long as I have the ability to serve, I will continue to do so. For as long as the electorate wants me to be here, I will be here. And the day they don't want me, I will find out at the polling station. There are opportunities there. And the reason why I want to avail any opportunity that comes my way is because I really do want to foster a kinder and compassionate kind of politics. I want younger people. I'm not here forever. This arena will be free. I want other young BAME ethnic women that are watching this today to say that I would like to have a position of public representation and foster opportunities for those women as well, because we can only do so by supporting each other. And I think that that's pivotal going ahead. But whether I'm in politics or not, I will always serve. I've always been in a public role throughout my whole life since graduation, and I will continue to serve. And it's something that is extremely rewarding and makes me sleep in peace at night as well.
As a community, as British Muslims, mashallah, we have enjoyed a lot of success individually. We see so many Muslims now who are in parliament, the legal profession, so many professions. But has that individual success yet translated into the overall success of our communities?
I think the fact that we have a generalized, if we compare ourselves to the United States, which is an enormous country, I think that, and this is something I got from the Pakistani foreign minister when we went to attend a dinner in his honor a couple of weeks ago. And he was very proud about the public representation that ethnic minority individuals here had in the political arena. And one thing he said was that he'd gone to America and said that they were very wealthy and had done very well for themselves, but they didn't compare to the ethnic minority public representatives here in the United Kingdom, because we were very hardworking and we had purpose. And that is why we had built up that representation. That is very humbling and honourable to see. And it makes me feel very proud that I can be just a little part of that community and hopefully continue to do so.
Finally, Dr. Shabina, Asad Qayyum, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. But what would be your concluding message to our viewers after the terrible events we see of today and the enormous challenges that we have as a society and country moving forward. What would be your concluding words?
My words are that when you go onto social media, if you don't agree with something, just don't say it. It is better to keep your opinions to yourself. Often we are ruled by our emotions, and I would say please exercise restraint, please be more kinder, please be more compassionate to one another. Take the responsibility upon yourself to exercise yourself in a certain way that is exemplary of you and what you want your children to grow up to be as well. So if you exercise yourself in a negative way, you most certainly wouldn't want your children to grow up to be that type of negative individual as well. So carry yourself as an individual that you would want your children to grow up to be, and be that example. And the responsibility starts with the self. Don't judge, be kinder, and be more compassionate.
Councillor Dr. Shabina Asad Qayyum, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for joining us on Behind the Headlines on British Muslim TV. It's been a pleasure having you on the programme today.
Thank you very much, Brother Ahmed.
And there's a huge amount that we've discussed today, dear viewers, around the horrific events today, the horrific murder of Sir David Amess, the motive of which we don't yet know, but the lessons that we need to learn in our lives as a collective around a more kinder, compassionate way of life. So often we are really consumed by our own priorities as individuals. But how much do we do in that community space, in that public space? What do we do to give back? One of our great successes is that, mashallah, so many of us do give back. But what can we do more? Councillor Dr. Shabina Asad Qayyum has been speaking to the fact that there needs to be more of us, more British Muslims in particular, British Muslim women, standing for public office, not seeing it as a role that is not for you or beyond you. No, it is within your reach. It is something that you can do to make a difference to not only your own life, the lives of those around you and the community and country at large. See you next week. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.